I want to talk to you this morning about something that I have seen in ministry. Those who have been in the pastorate, you've been beside. I think it was Pastor Fanning who said that you spend time with people who are at the end of their lives. And one of the biggest things that had always struck me was people who are looking at their lives knowing that the future is not there, at least on this earth. And it's about this one word, regret. And I know that if you're 20 or 30 and you're younger than that, that seems like such a word that is so vague. But as you get older, that word becomes crucial. Regret. All of us will have it. We have regrets. We regret things like this. I wish I had shown up on time. Or I wish I would have spoken up. Or I wish I hadn't eaten that. Wish I had been saving my money. I wish I would have asked her out. Or I wish I had not asked her out. Right? Regret has a unique sting to it, right? I mean, all pain stings, but regret has a unique sting because it's not just, I wish things had turned out differently, it's this, I know things could have turned out differently if I would have acted other than the way that I did. That's why regret is so tough, right? Let me get it in a setting. I mean, I'm disappointed that the Yankees were swept by the Boston Red Sox, right? Very disappointed. Extremely disappointed. Really disappointed. But I don't regret it. I don't regret it. Why? Because I had no power to change the outcome. Regret keeps me awake at night because I had the power to change things. Everybody here knows about regret. It may be small, it may be large. I've been watching on television, this anti-smoking thing, I think by the New York State. And it has this woman who is dying of emphysema. And she has regrets. She probably looks back on her first cigarette and thinks, wow, if I had only not started it. Or when a husband loses his family because of alcoholism. And that person looks back maybe at the first drink and thinks, wow, why did I go down that road? Or when a couple who's now in divorce court and they think back to their wedding vows and they wonder, how did we ever end up here? You know, the Bible, like our world, has a lot of stories about regret. And I think maybe the hottest expressed regret in the Bible comes from a man named David. And I want to tell you that if you enter into this message, as I have, it will be painful. The capacity for regret is really a gift from God because it means we can learn. We can start today a new day, a new week, a new month, a new year. And we can ask ourselves, you know what? If I keep living the way I'm living today, what would be the biggest regret in my life? And how might God call me to change the way that I'm living so that I don't end up there, so that I don't live like that, and I can live with more hope and less regret? The best time, listen, to address regret is before it happens. So I'm going to tell you a story, a Bible story. You're in 2 Samuel 13. So let's just start with the story. So you pretend we're in Vacation Bible School. Here's the first thing. All of us have a tendency to think that Bible characters were perfect people. King David was a messed up person, and he had a messed up family. How many of you ever think, or you realize after the holidays or after a family reunion, after having the relatives over for dinner, that it might have struck you, our family is a bit whacked, right? Anybody? Just, you don't have to raise your hand, just nod. Most of us, when you raise your hand, we all went, yeah, definitely. Well, that's David's family, right? In fact, listen to these issues that went on in David's family, a man after God's own heart. There was adultery, polygamy, substance abuse, years of just total estrangement, vandalism, open hatred, rape, murder, incest. How many are starting to think, my family's not really that bad now? So let me give you the setting. Here's the setting of this story, 2 Samuel 13. David, stick with me, David is king. And this is way after the Bathsheba deal. And David has a son named Amnon. And Amnon, his son, is experiencing this intense physical desire. He is lusting after this girl named Tamar, who is David's daughter by another wife. So Tamar is Amnon's half-sister. So he is consumed by her to the point that he's like physically ill. Now, another relative notices this. David doesn't have a clue. So a relative sees that Amnon is miserable, he's pale, he can't eat, and Amnon tells him. And so together they have this plot that Amnon will pretend that he is even more ill to get Tamar to bring him food. And then he will seduce her. Now, here's what I want you to note. David is clueless about what's going on in his family. He's distracted, whatever. But not only does he not notice Amnon's obsession for his half-sister, David ends up being the actual person to set this up. Amnon tries to put the move on Tamar, and she refuses. She is shocked. But he is stronger, and so he physically forces her against her will. And when he is done with her, this is a very dark story. That's why they don't do this during VBS. The text says, 2 Samuel 13:15, then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. 2 Samuel 13:17. So he called his personal servant and said, "Get this woman out of here and bolt the door after her." Now notice how he refers to her. It's not "get Tamar, my sister," but this woman. Right? We all do that. We all tend to demonize people when we're angry with them or ticked, to sort of justify it to ourselves. Right? You know that in your own family. If your kid does something good, the parent will say, "That's my boy, that's my kid." But if the kid does something messed up, you say to your spouse, "Look at what your son did." Right? Amnon rejects Tamar. And it says in verse 18, chapter 13, so the servant put her out and bolted the door after her. Now, Tamar is the only one in this story that has any integrity and courage. And so she tells her father, David, what happened. Now, in that culture, all too often in our culture, the Me Too movement, it takes remarkable courage for a woman to do this, especially at that time, because she has no power. What if people don't believe her? But she tells the truth at great risk because she trusts that her dad will do something. And so she waits for David, her father, who has the power of the whole throne behind him, to do something, to say something, to stand up for her, to show just a little measure of courage. But he doesn't. Tamar has a brother named Absalom. And he finds out what happens, and so he invites her to live with him in his home. And so she does. She lives with him, not with her dad. And they both are now waiting for their dad, David, to do something. Days go by, weeks go by, months go by, and they're thinking, man, surely the king will do something. Surely my father will take action. Chapter 13, verse 21. When King David heard all of this, he was furious. But that's it. He did nothing. He didn't lift a finger. He didn't say a word on behalf of his daughter. Why? Why not? The text doesn't tell us why. Maybe, I think, he lacked the moral ground to confront his son. Maybe. I mean, look at what Amnon did. He lusted after a woman, he wanted her, he took her. And he thought he could use his power and his position to take what he wanted from her and then just discard her. Where do you think he might have gotten that idea? Maybe his dad, right? We say, like father, like son. But he does nothing. Zip. Let me give you just a side note when we think about regret. Most of the time, what we regret is not so much what we've done, but more often than not, it's something we should have done. 2 years passed, 2 years of humiliation for Tamar, 2 years of being passive for David, and 2 years of brooding vengeance in Absalom. Absalom is becoming, really, in this story, a very dangerous person. And he decides that if his father is too gutless to do anything, he will take matters into his own hands. So Absalom finds a pretext to sort of get his brother Amnon out of the capital, and he says to his servants, let's first get Amnon drunk, and then we'll take action. Now, if you know the story of David's life, David tried to get somebody else drunk to cover his mistake, right? Remember Bathsheba? She becomes pregnant. Her husband has been on the battlefield. He brings him back, and he tries to get her husband Uriah to be with his wife. And it looks like then he could be the father. Absalom avenges his sister by killing his half-brother. And by the way, Amnon was the oldest son, so he was the next person in line to be king. Guess who now the oldest son is? Absalom. So Absalom has to really run away. He has to kill this son of the king. And so for 3 years, he lives in exile. 3 years. Look at chapter 13, verse 39. It says this, and the spirit of the king, that's David, longed to go to Absalom, but he didn't go. You know, he was furious when he heard about it, but he did nothing. Now he longs to be with his other son, Absalom, but he does nothing. So finally, a guy named Joab, who's sort of like the chief of staff, he intervenes, and he gets David to promise, look, if Absalom comes back out of exile, back to Jerusalem, will you promise not to harm him? David makes the promise. But then he makes another horrible mistake. You remember we went through the parables, the prodigal son? The prodigal son is coming home, and his father runs out to meet him. He just can't wait to see him. That really is the heart of a dad. Well, here's Absalom coming back to Jerusalem, and you kind of wonder what's going on in the heart of Absalom. Look at 14:24. The king said, David, he must go to his own house. He must not see my face. So Absalom went to his own house, and the king did not see his face, nor did he see the face of the king. Right? A boy wants to see his dad's face. And when you think about it, when Absalom needed to see his father's face the most, when he needed most for his father to listen to him, listen to his hurt, listen to his confusion, his hatred, his anger, his love, all the messed up stuff that was going on inside him, he did not see his father's face. David was not there. Maybe to stop for a second, because you remember these stories are not written just so we have knowledge. They're written, as Paul said, as examples to help us. I wonder who needs to see your face. I wonder who needs to just be listened to listen to the junk that's inside. Day after day, for 2 years, Absalom lived in the same neighborhood as his father. His heart was breaking. There was a wall between them. They lived in the same town. but he never saw his father's face. And it drives Absalom crazy. At one time, Absalom, and you know kids will do this, he forces a meeting by setting fire to the royal cornfield. I don't know if it was corn, but I'm from Kentucky. If he can't get to his dad in one way, he'll do it another way. And again, the chief of staff intervenes and he says, "Why did you set this field on fire?" And he said, "I want to see my dad." And so he meets with his dad and they have a discussion, but they didn't really talk. In fact, it was just words going back and forth. And so Absalom, for the next several years, he hangs out in Jerusalem, and he is so angry that he begins to undermine his dad. He would stand at the gate, and when people would come and they knew who he was, they would come for help. They would come for like justice. And Absalom would say, and I'm making this up, but you get the point. He would say, "Oh, you know what? You have a very good case. I feel for you. But you know what? There's no way to get to the king. I mean, David really doesn't care. The system is broken. If I were in charge, I'd watch out for you." And the text says that he was handsome and full of character. Now, I just want to say, guys, there's nothing wrong with being handsome and full of character. It's not fair, but there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, he was just like his father when his father was younger. And sometimes people would come and they would bow down before him, and Absalom would stop them and raise them up and embrace them as though they were equals. And look at this, chapter 15, verse 6. It says, Absalom stole the hearts of the people. And guess what? Absalom eventually seizes power. And David, his father, the king, he has to run for his life. It's the king that has to go now into exile. And it'll show you how severe the level of relational breakdown and hatred that's inside of Absalom. Absalom had a pavilion set up on the roof of the palace. And he would publicly, I don't know how to say this because it is in the Bible, but he had relations with his father's concubines that were left behind. In fact, look at this, chapter 16, verse 22. He did this in the sight of all of Israel. See, he wants to humiliate his father, and in the most degrading way that he can think of, because he wants to let everybody know, I'm now in charge, because there's so much hurt. I mean, this is the most in-your-face thing he could do. It's bad, it's wrong, and it's all flowing out of a broken, twisted, confused heart. He is using these women to get to David. Now, where did Absalom learn to treat women like that? I know some of you are younger, you're maybe kids, you're not quite in that age group that left, and you're sitting there like I used to as a kid, and you're thinking, what is a concubine? Well, ask your parents when you get home. Just bring it up at the dinner table. I'll give you a clue. It's kind of like a porcupine, but it's different. So just ask your parents. So David, don't write me, write the elders. David, who was a military genius, David, who had planned so many battles, now has a plan to battle his own son. And his generals tell him in the text that, David, this is going to be a very tough battle. It could go either way. You don't go into battle, king. It's too risky. You stay behind. So they do. They go to battle. David stays behind. Now, can you imagine his heart wanting to know how the battle turns out? And a runner comes back to tell him this: the rebellion is ended. Your throne, King David, is safe. Your kingdom is secure. The rebel is dead. And here's what's so heartbreaking. Even years ago, David was still king and Absalom was in exile. And we're told in chapter 13, verse 39, the heart of the king went out, yearning for Absalom. But Absalom never knew that. He never heard it. David never told him. Why not? The story doesn't tell us. You know, we're funny people. Why do we make these horrible decisions that we later regret? I can tell you for me what it is. Sometimes it's pride. Sometimes it's just stubbornness. Sometimes it's fear. The heart of the king went out, yearning for Absalom. But he never left. David never went. David never said to his son those words. And in all this time of brokenness and estrangement, there's one word that David never uses to refer to Absalom. You know what it is? He never said son. Not when his sister was raped, not when Absalom avenged her, not when Absalom was in exile, not when Absalom returned, not when he was living, there day after day, week after week, and not when David had to flee. Even when the battle began to begin, when it started, David's words to the general was these words. Look at this, 18:5. Be gentle with the young man Absalom. Right? Not be gentle with my son. And when the battle is over, a messenger comes running to him, and David's question is not, how's the battle going? His question is this. Look at chapter 18, verse 29. Is the young man Absalom safe? And the messenger can't bring himself to say it, but David doesn't say, is my son safe? No, he says, is the young man safe? And that messenger won't tell David because he has a sense for what's going to happen when David finds out. And then another messenger comes up, and David asks the very same question. He goes, is the young man Absalom safe? And this messenger thinks he's bringing good news, and he yells out, yes, the rebel is dead. And all of a sudden, this moment of clarity breaks through all of his stubbornness and his pride and his hardness. And the text says, look at this, 18:33, the king was shaken, and he went up to the room over the gateway and wept. Shaken, why? Because he suddenly sees life with clarity. He sees his baby boy that he held so long ago. He sees a child who probably just adored his father. He remembers seeing this little boy who played soldier, and surely he must have played David and Goliath because he wanted to be like his dad. He wanted to be like a hero. And he remembers the bitter, disillusioned brother and this misguided rebel. David thinks of all that could have been, but never will be. He thinks maybe of the father that he wanted to be, that he might have been, but never was. He thinks of all the stupid choices that he made, all the pride, all the wrong roads that he went down, all the words that he should have said to Absalom, but he didn't. And finally, he pronounces the word that he could not say for all those years. Suddenly, it's as if this word is a word that he can't stop saying. It's like he had been storing this up all those years, and now he just wants to say it over and over and over again, even though his heart breaks every time he says it. Look at this, 1833. Oh, my son, Absalom, my son, Absalom. If only I would have died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. I think part of why his heart was breaking is he wondered how this, for us, this old, sad story would have turned out so differently if he had just said that word, if he had just lived that word earlier. My son, I will be your father. You will be my son. Now let's talk. Let's talk about your heart. Let's talk about choices. Let's talk about your sorrows. Let's talk about where things went wrong. Let's talk about how things got messed up. Let's talk about forgiveness. My son. My son. He just can't stop saying it. It's almost like if he just says it enough, if he just lets his heart break enough, maybe it could bring back his son. My son. All the regret. That was his word, son. What's your word? What word do you need to say? Because you might be headed for regret if things don't change. You know, you often hear this, and I've heard it when I was in Bedford with a lot of guys who were very high achievers. You would hear them say, you know, when my kids were growing up, I was so busy, I was consumed by my work, I traveled so much. And then they say, but now I'd give anything to have those years over again. But they're only small once. Maybe it's for you, the regret is your financial life. Maybe there's a debt, maybe there's foolish spending. One day when you get to the end of your life and you look back on how you handled your gifts, your finances, you're going to maybe say, why did I hoard all of that stuff? What was the deal I was thinking about in terms of money and security, possession and image? Maybe you're married. You know, nobody that I've ever married ever gets married expecting regrets, right? Nobody stands up in church and plans on regret. It's just the daily grind that blocks intimacy. And again, just to remind you, the real pain of regret is not so much what you've done, but what you could have done. Let me tell you a quick story. I know that time's up, but I'm on a roll. Years ago, Laura and I lived on an island, and I mean an island. And when it's past a certain time, there's really no way to get off the island. Well, let me give you a setup, but don't repeat it. Laura and I had a huge disagreement. We were arguing about, how much work I do at the house. And I told her, look, I enjoy it, so just take it easy. Not. Anyway, I won't tell you what the argument, but I was ticked off. And so I do what I normally do. I gave her the silent treatment. She asked me a question, one-word answers. Is everything all right? Yes. Right? Now, most of you husbands are thinking, that's what my wife does. Well, that's what I do in my marriage. I was ticked off. And so in the middle of it, Laura had just seen a doctor in Seattle, and he prescribed a medication for her. And so she came back over the ferry and came back to the house, and before she went to bed, she took the medicine. Ferry shut down at around 11:30. And the only way to get her to a hospital, if she needed it, is to have a helicopter come or to drive up to Oak Harbor, which is at the other end of an island. It's the biggest island. It's bigger than Long Island. And that's at a naval base. Well, about 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard her gasping. And what happened was she had an allergic reaction that was closing her throat. And I remember I quickly got on the phone, called a parishioner who lives nearby. I said, please come over, watch the kids. The kids were a little smaller then. And I remember, because of being on the island, I kept thinking, because she was like, she couldn't speak. She was going, and I thought, what if this gets tighter? See, I always thought that I would be the one dying and I could use it. I'm coming home, Elizabeth. So it just terrified me that this could go another way. And I remember, and Laura knows it now, but I said, we got to get in the car. Let's go. We got to go up to Oak Harbor, which is, 45 minutes away or more. And I remember I took a knife and alcohol and a pen because I'd seen it on a movie. And I was prepared to do a trach if I had to. I got her up there. But I tell you this, all the pride left. All the playing games left. I told her all the way up, I'm so sorry. Honey, I love you. I'm sorry I was so stupid. And the issue really wasn't that important that we were arguing about. Anyway, we got to the hospital, they gave her a shot, and it went away. What if I lost her? It's amazing how silent treatments end, how pride goes out the door when reality hits us. So maybe God is calling you to take a risk. And maybe you've been shrinking back out of fear or pride or whatever, and you're going to get to the end of your life, and you're going to say, God, why didn't I trust you? So maybe for some of you, there needs to be confession. Some of you are thinking, Dwight, it's now too late. I'm that father that now the kids are gone. There is regret. I can't fix it. The children are now gone. The divorce has already happened. The person has already died. What about me? What do you do when you can't fix regret? You give it to God, who cannot fail. Remember what David said? Absalom, my son, oh, I wished I could have died in your place. Well, that's really the gospel. We all have sinned. We all have a ton of regrets. But on the cross, Christ died in your place. My son, if only I could have died in your place. Would you bow? Let's pray. Father, would you speak to us right now on this hot July Sunday? And would you speak to us? And God, would we speak to you right now? It may be that there is some discomfort involved, but Lord, if the Spirit is convicting us about an area that we're headed toward regret, Lord, help us to surrender. Give us the strength to get on a different road. And we pray together, Father, I don't want to end up with big regrets. And I'm going to need your power to help the change. Amen. I hope you do that.